and how yours might be different. How yours might be different from what we require, just based on if you're not going to apply for a regional park status or trail status. So what we'd like to cover today is first just the question, why do you want to complete a master plan? Then we can talk a little bit about the planning process itself and how that might work best for your community. And then some of the components of a master plan, which hopefully you can learn more about in future parts of this series. If you want to learn more about what the commission requires in its master plans, our strategic plan available on our website, gmrptcommission.org, has all the content standards in section 4. Most of you are going to be pretty familiar with it, but if you haven't, that's a great place to sort of start looking it up. And all of the plans that we review, it's not just sitting at my desk and looking at them. It's understanding them over time. We do site visits. We get data later on as to how use is impacted by various added amenities or as things change over time. So we've had the pleasure of seeing these master plans done and also the impact it has in getting people into the outdoors. So that's kind of where we're at and why the commission does some of what it does. Now, why do you want a master plan? Well, the purpose of a master plan is to prove really what, how, and why. Probably most importantly, why. If you're going to apply to the GMRPTC to become a part of our regional system so that you can apply for legacy funding, a master plan is required. Outside of that, a master plan really is vital to prove that your park or trail is well vetted, not only for yourself as an agency lead or champion, but also for your elected officials, for your taxpayers, your other constituents, and your users. The plan can be used to show how the park or trail, as you envision it over the long term, how it's a fit for that particular community. We spend a lot of time looking at regional context and how it fits in. So if you're pursuing that designation, a plan does show how your facility is regionally significant, how it supports what's going on, what users are looking for in that area. And it also tells us how well you do against our criteria for regional designation. A plan can also ensure that you as the applicant, and more importantly, your board or council, as Carlin was getting at just a little bit ago, make sure that your board understands its own obligations and responsibilities, especially when it comes to getting funding, including local match that might be needed for any grants that you want to go after, but also to make sure that they understand that once this park or trail is built out, there's going to be some increase in maintenance, operations, programming, all those things. And I've seen so many instances where a good, well-developed plan that has buy-in from the board or council actually gets them thinking about, okay, how do we start increasing the budget to make sure we cover and maintain this investment that we're making in this park or trail? So that's a really important point that we do not want to lose ever. So a key thing that I always emphasize and the commission emphasizes when you're putting together a master plan, how do you think about all these different components, all these things that need to go into it? It's really about how you tell your story. We want you to tell the best story about your park or trail and even your community that you can. And a master plan can help you to do that. The way we have it set up on our system is you go to an online portal, you complete many, many different components of the master plan individually, and they help to sort of tie together the story for your facility so that you and your public and agency and everyone involved starts to get what your park is all about, and it can make a difference because every park is different. You may think that they should all have a playground and hopefully they all have a water source and they've all got trails, but some of them are very heavy on all kinds of different trails, and other ones are all about just a day use area in the neighborhood. Or you may have different kinds of trails for mountain biking or long distance cross country travel or just to get through your community. So all those things are part of the story that you can tell in your master plan. We also want within that story to be able to tell not only what your facility offers, but who is going to come to use it. And that's a huge part of the master planning process, is to make sure you understand that what you want to do with this park is what your users are actually looking for, that you've got backup and proof that they are going to be coming once this facility is developed. So thinking about the planning process, how do you make all of that happen? Well, I laid out here a typical planning process, and this can vary quite a bit depending on what you do, but this is just kind of generic. Starting off with defining some goals, describing your situation, doing your inventory, what's your community like, defining what you want to achieve, your criteria. Maybe once you sort of get all that wrapped up into a vision, you want to develop some alternative scenarios, which you then evaluate, listen to your community, tell you what they think of those alternatives, and then moving into selecting your preferred alternatives and figuring out how you're going to implement them, and then eventually evaluate the outcomes. How many people are now coming to your trail? And all that feeds right back into the system. So 5 years down the road, or 10 years, or something in between, when you redo your master plan, you've got new data showing X number of campers are now using this, or in Carlin's case, 25% a year in number of kids coming to the nature center, or whatever those numbers happen to be. They can help to define the next phase of development for your park or trail. Now, the process is one thing, being able to define that, but how you actually go through it, I believe, is even more important. And what is central to a successful planning process, in my experience, to get those good outcomes at the very end, it's about the public engagement. It's about making sure that you listen carefully to what the public has to say, what they want. And I've talked about this at other workshops. Sorry if you've heard some of this before, but our goal is to make sure, by seeing that you have good public engagement, that the ideas in your plan aren't just the wish or the dream of a couple of key people who've got all the power in your community. It's about making sure that, yeah, those ideas are brought forward, but can the public make it different, make it better, make it more true to what they actually want to come and use? So that public engagement is a really key part. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But there's a lot of people that are involved when you think about that public, and especially the people close to it. You've got your community leaders, your staff that are leading the process. Maybe you've got some champions in your community. Maybe you've got other partners, different agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, nonprofits, other entities, business partners. Maybe you're bringing in consultants to help with your planning process, or you've got other volunteers that want to help. The best planning processes that I've worked with don't just leave it to one or even two of these different community groups or individuals to put together a master plan and lead the process. The best plans I've seen actually bring all of these folks around a table to work through a process and help to interpret the public engagement that is coming in, listening to what the public says and making sure that the final plan reflects that, and also providing their own input at appropriate places. Having that group around the table can make the process, sometimes, I'll be honest, because I work with a lot of these groups and a lot of other types of projects, it can be a little bit of a hassle to bring a committee together and ask them hard questions and get their reaction to things. But at the same time, the value they add is really what's important to a master plan. So we really encourage this. A great example, we just recently had a new trail be added to our system that actually did not have had very little staff and no consultants involved. But they had a couple of community champions that brought together 12 or 14 people into a committee like this, and everybody divvied up a portion of the master plan and worked through that process, writing individual sections for it. And they did a fantastic job for was essentially a volunteer-led process. They needed a little bit of expertise in a few areas, and definitely they had lots of conversations with partners and community leaders in the community in general. But it really worked to use that community-based process. So when you're developing your process, think about the steps you want to go through, but make sure it's all built on a solid foundation of public engagement that has the right people involved to make it happen. And we like to encourage people thinking about public engagement to design their engagement process with the end in mind. Who do you want to have involved with your process? If you're trying for something with more equity in it, how are you going to invite the right people to be involved in the process? Will it be transparent? How are you going to listen? Do you have ground rules in participation? How do you process solutions that people are suggesting? And then very important as well, share your results. Make sure the public has a chance to say, you know, you listened to us pretty well, but what I'm seeing in this plan isn't quite what we really said. That can be an important part of public engagement as well. So there's a lot of techniques. Some of them are listed here. I'll let Carlin take that away for another future forum, so you can go into that in some detail. But we just like to emphasize that public engagement process during the planning, the master planning piece is just super critical. All right, everyone ready? Carlin, any questions or anything so far? Any chats? No?
Nope, nothing
All
so
right.
far.
Excellent. So let's talk about master plan components then. What needs to go into your master plan? There's a lot of different ways to break this out. Stuart's probably like, yeah, Joe, here's your list. And we've got our list, and never between them shall they meet. But these can be handy just to provide you a little bit of framework and thinking about what you need for your particular park or trail. If you're going to be regionally designated, you're going to need a pretty hefty dosing of all of these park components. If you just got a little neighborhood park that already has some public engagement to it and you just want to get design done, maybe you just go to one or two of these different sections and you complete that, and that could be your master plan. In certain cases, that can work. But what we have seen a change from over the years is people thinking that the development and implementation plan is the master plan. That's the what and when. That's the goal that everyone always wants to get to, right? What are you going to develop? How are you going to get it there? What's the phasing? What new things are you going to put in? How are you going to maintain what you have? That's what people are always looking for. In a planning process, remember that story you talked about? The what and when is very important. But even more important for us in our process, and maybe in your community, is to figure out the why. Why are you going to develop what you want to develop? That's where taking a look at your facility inventory, your context, that public vision and values that they give you through public engagement, all of that can really significantly impact what you want to build, in what order, and when you're able to accomplish it. So all of that is very important. And then on the backside, for certain constituencies, again, like your council, your board, how are you going to do it? They need to have that funding piece there to support you, staffing, infrastructure, whatever it takes. The how you're going to manage and operate that facility can be a very important part. And if you've got a larger system that you're working within, maybe you don't need to spend a lot of time on some of this. Maybe you have a system plan that already gave you lots of good public engagement, and you already know what you want to do in that park as an overall value. Or maybe your management and operations are already laid out in a system plan or a department level plan or something like that. But if you're just working on a master plan, or especially if it's a master plan for requesting regional designation, we do want to see those parts fairly well laid out. So let's talk about some of the individual components. Just in brief, giving GMPT time to come back and we can learn a little bit more about some of these. And hopefully you can tell us what you want out of some of these areas for future workshop purposes, or what questions you have or what ideas you have. So feel free to chime in as we go through these, or we'll talk about it at the end here too. So the first piece that everybody always likes to start with is, what do we currently have? What is our inventory? And it can be anything from War Road Point Park, as you've got shown here, that's got extensive campgrounds, waterfront facilities. All those things are laid out already. And that's where your starting point is. Or it could be all the way down to, there's this parcel of land over here. We don't own it yet, but we think it'd be great. We've seen everything in between. Having some general description of what you want to do, what's there, an inventory of the physical properties of that site, whether it's natural resource characteristics. Tell us about the surrounding development. Here in Warroad, in this example, it's surrounded by neighborhood residential development. That is fantastic. Or if you get out to Carlin, where she's at now at Oxbow, there is just a whole lot of nature and agriculture and everything else surrounding it. It's going to vary a lot by the type of facility or the area of the state you're in. So be sure to use that to define your story a little bit. Not all parks are created equal, and it really starts with the context of the area it's in. You also want to have an idea of any other conditions affecting development. That can be everything from, okay, we can't annex anything else because we got this neighborhood here, to this harbor that they're building up here in Warroad that is really controlled by the Corps of Engineers. And you know that you're going to have to go through a pretty hefty process to do anything with that. Or you may have other limitations by easements or covenants, or just the current property owner you want to buy from. They've got a goal for that property as well. So understand some of those conditions that are affecting your development or the potential for the property is why you kind of want to have some of that inventory in place. Let's look at the next section, some of your regional context. We're big on this because we're the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission. And our job is to really understand how a particular park fits in to the larger regional context against other state parks in the area, other regional parks or trails, and just see how what you want to do complements what's going on. This particular graphic here is an analysis that LeSueur County did for Lake Washington County Park, kind of in the middle there. They highlighted the park next to the lake on the map and had a list of amenities in that park. And they did the same for some of the other regional level type facilities there. So we could easily see at a glance just how this particular facility fits in, complements what's going on at some of the neighboring parks. That made a great piece of that story for regional context there. Well, we want to understand, okay, if you're a regional park and you're right next to a state park, do they need more camping? Do they not have enough and that's why you want to build a campground? Or do they have so much camping that they're never full? So why are you trying to build a campground? You know, those things are important to know. And also to think about any trail connections that may be going on between these different facilities can be a great part of the story. Or between a park that's outside of town and into town. How are people getting there? Those things are important, as well as the population demographics, especially for your area and the region you serve. That's a lot of context. We have everything from, I was reading a master plan the other day for one of Minnesota's urbanizing areas that emphasized just how young their community is, all the colleges they have in their area, and how they needed to emphasize within the trail that they were working on that connection that young adults were looking for to get down to the water, to get on this trail, whatever it is. And we've got other facilities, thinking of one in Western Minnesota that they're in a very rural area that has a decidedly aging population. So their concerns are more about access, having a good quality road, picnic shelters with paved routes for people to get to them that may be mobility limited, and different things that allow people to maybe more in that age bracket to enjoy nature that way. So understanding your population demographics can play an important part there. And also don't forget about the economics. We want you to be able to tell a story for your commissioners about the impact that tourism and outdoor recreation can have on your community. So if you've got XYZ number of people coming in every year and you think you can increase that 25%, what's the economic impact of that going to be? Or if you're in an area that hasn't traditionally been a tourism-based economy, tell a story about how that is changing and how you think this park can be a part of that changing story over the next 5 or 10 years. And that may relate to the population. It may relate to where people are coming from. Are you tapping into the Twin Cities visitor demographic? Maybe they're coming from Rapid City, South Dakota, or somewhere in Iowa. Or maybe even you get a lot of Canadians coming down. We've got areas of the state that's their emphasis for all those things. So those economics and demographics can play a big part in your context for your facility as well. Doesn't mean you have to write a lot about it, but just make sure you write enough to understand what's going on with those pieces as well. All right. What's the next one? Oh yes, public vision, values, and trends. This is sort of the distillation, I like to say, of the public engagement process. How do you take all the information that you get from your surveys, your forums, your focus groups, whatever it is that you have going on, and distilling it down into hopefully a nice, succinct vision statement to start, your headline. Why do you want to do this facility, this park, or this trail? And for us, we like to not only see what your vision is, but tell us enough about the public engagement so that we can connect the dots when we look at it from what people were saying, what were the summaries of the comments you heard, and how does that tie into the vision that you just wrote in a couple of sentences or whatever your vision statement looks like. So describe the public's values, help to define what they told you and who was a part of that telling process. Did you hear from everyone in the community? Were there parts of your community that didn't respond, you couldn't get hold of? That happens. It's hard to get some groups to participate in certain communities, but show how you made the effort to reach out to them and what they did say when you talked to any of those particular groups. We also like to talk about trends regarding local and regional recreation use patterns. And we do see differences in this across the state. We spend a lot of time talking mountain bikes in the northeast part of the state. We spend a lot of time in the southwest part of the state talking about camping because that's how people recreate more. Southeast Minnesota, as Carolyn knows, for some reason, we've got a lot of nature centers. They're doing fantastic because that's how people want to recreate in that area. That's how they get in touch. You get in other areas of the state like the Northwest, it's a lot more riverine type access. People want to get canoe and kayak more. They're learning about the rivers, and that's how people are starting to connect with nature more. So understand some of those trends for your area, and if you can figure out what they are, talking to some experts, figuring out what other facilities have and how much use they're getting, that can be a part of your story as well. So look for some of those trends, listen to what people are telling you, and figure out how can you distill all of that down into one vision statement. Now you get to the fun stuff, right? The show and tell at the end of the day. What is it that you want to build? What is your what? What does the future look like? Well, it can be a lot of things. Shown on this map here, going back to Lake Washington Regional Park, they did a great map. It incorporates what they already have and also shows us what they want to build by phase over time. In a master plan, this can be a little tough to figure out exactly what level in all cases you want to have your drawings at, but we like to see enough detail either on the overall concept design or details you provide about certain amenities that we can understand what you intend to do. If you say that you're going to build a pavilion here, show us on a map so we can understand the context between there and the beach or there and the campground. Show us what it looks like. So we can understand if you're looking to build a $15,000 picnic shelter or a monster $250,000 picnic shelter that you're going to have huge festivals at. Those differences are important for us to be able to evaluate what you're trying to accomplish. We do not need to see detailed design or any construction level documents at the master plan level. You don't need to go that far, but having a good sketch as is shown here, and even just pictures of other things that you like that are what you're envisioning for your campsites or for your horse corral or whatever it is you're going to build, give us an idea of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And then phasing. The reality is none of these things get done in one phase, unless you're super lucky with a bonding bill or something weird like that. I don't think I've seen that happen yet. All of these things are going to end up getting done over some sort of phasing, a 5, a 10, a 15-year plan, a short, medium, and long-term plan. Whatever your phasing is, make sure that it's appropriate. Make sure that each phase accomplishes something. We always try to, when people are putting together a funding application, we try to encourage them to develop or complete a piece of the user experience, something that feels whole for the user. So you're not just putting a road in and it doesn't do anything. Do the road, the parking lot, and your first picnic shelter. If you're developing trails, try and do a piece of a loop or something so that people can, they're not just going out and back because they hit the end or something like that. Develop some sort of consistency within your phasing that seems to make sense. We see a lot of basic infrastructure in first phases, which makes sense. Get your water pipes in, get your roads in, but then think about, okay, if we build the campground first, this means X, but we also need the day use areas, which should come first. So think about that, what's best for your community. All right. And then what comes after? You've got your development and your implementation plan put together. Well, that's when you need to start looking at your management and operations. That includes a lot more than just knowing what's it going to take to keep the site mowed and the toilet paper changed, although we see plenty of parks and trails where that is sort of the gold standard. What we try to accomplish is to help you think a little bit more, especially if you're going to be a regional park. These are dollars that Minnesotans voted in to make regional level facilities. You should be doing something with them more than just building a couple of things and not getting people in there. So we want you to look at not only what it takes to maintain and operate the site, but think about your marketing. Think about any programming that you want to do. What are you doing to get people in there, to get them excited, to teach them how to use that park to its most? How are you going to get people excited about the natural resource opportunities that you have going on there? Also think about natural resource management. Unfortunately, we've got infestations of all kinds of invasive species that can require a lot of intensive management. So make sure you have a plan for that. Maybe you've got some lakeshore or riverfront areas that are going to require some ongoing investment to make sure you keep that water source in good quality. Whatever your case may be for your natural resources, be sure to think about what the investment's going to take over time. And then also think about tracking your user metrics. How are you going to track campers? How many come in? How long they're there, and where they're coming from? That's great data for you down the road. It's good to develop trends over time. If you're going to be putting in trails, find ways to get some trail counters out there. What's the best trail counter for your area? How are you going to collect it? How are you going to secure them? How many do you need? Those can be important pieces of it. Are you going to work with us every few years to do a user survey, on site, asking people who are there, what do you think of this facility? Where are you from? How often are you coming back? How did you find out about it? All those things are good to know, and we can help with some of those pieces as well. Maintenance and operations should also list out your local sources of funding and revenue. So if you've got a park where you're going to be putting some programming into it, do you have a fee that you charge for any of that programming? Or do you have some sponsorships that you think you can acquire to keep the programming costs low or non-existent? Is the county going to be putting anything into this as far as tax dollars to make it successful? So think about all those things, and that's a part of the overall management and operations plan that we look for. You might not have to go to that level of detail, but at least spend a little bit of time thinking about all of these things, because you don't want to trip yourself up later when you build something and you realize we have no capacity to keep this up. We can hardly keep the lawn mowed. I don't know why we built that zip line, because we can't staff it. You know, those things can happen. So figure out a way you're going to make those things work for yourself. Why, again, do you want to do all of this work into later management and operations? You want to reduce the unexpected surprises for you and especially your board. Nobody wants to go to their board and say, oh boy, we got a problem. Don't let that happen to yourself. Promotes proper budgeting. Get ahead of your board so they start thinking about the budget they're going to need to give you. And then it's an indication to us, a pretty clear indication actually, that you're ready to actually take the infrastructure investment that you're asking for and develop it and maintain it, which is important to us, because we don't want to give dollars to build something to an agency that isn't ready for it. I'll be clear with you on that. So be sure you understand that. When you're into detailed operations planning, of course, it should describe the year-to-year plan for maintaining and operating it, include your list of routine activities. What I've seen starting to happen, and it can be very, very valuable, is when you're developing a phasing plan for implementation, you've got that 5, 10, 15-year plan, short, medium, long. When you get done for each of those phases, say you've got your campground done at the end of phase 1, you've got all your beach stuff done at the end of phase 2, show what the concurrent maintenance scheme is going to look like and cost at the end of that phase. So you can keep increasing your budget with each of those. So it's not about all of a sudden getting the maintenance dollar once you're built out. It's about growing with the facility, right? And that can be a really powerful way we found to really be prepared and be ready for all those investments as they come online. Because it's going to happen over a while, and you've got to be ready to start putting that money back into it. So that's your maintenance and operations planning. In fact, that's most of master planning. So Carolyn told me to keep it fairly high level and short. You got to listen to Carolyn, so we make sure to do that. If you want to learn a little bit more, we do keep a selection of sample master plans on our website, on our application tab. You can scroll down there and take a look at some of those samples. Those are all facilities that have been designated, and they run the gamut from things that have been extremely well developed with some of the best consultants in the state to ones that have been completely developed by volunteer groups. We see all different varieties, and we're excited about that because that means that our system is more accessible for all greater Minnesota's communities. So take a look at some of those master plans if you need some more ideas. And other than that, there's my contact information. We're always willing to help. One trick for you, if you go to our gmrptcommission.org, we, of course, have a master planning portal for anyone applying to us that wants to have their master plan evaluated for regional designation. It needs to be a part of that portal. But that portal is open to anyone, even if you don't want to apply for designation. It's a tool you can use to sort of help organize your thoughts and get them into order, and it'll even help you print out the document at the end so you don't have to do as much graphic design with it. So feel free to use that tool. Let us know how it goes for you, and we're always looking for feedback on how we can make this system better. So that's as short as I can make it. Sorry. But we'd love to answer any questions that you may have, and hopefully you can help us get ready for future events in this series. Carlin?
Thank you, Joe. That was very full of information. So I appreciate everything that you put into it. So yeah, it's a really important step. And I just redeveloped our master plans after a 5-year cycle, and I learned a lot more that I now wish I would have put into them. So, 5 years down the road, I'll make sure to go back to this and watch this again. But so now's the time where we can open it up to any questions or comments. I know there's some other consultants and design consultants on with us. So if anybody else has any other comments that you'd like to say or input that you'd like to give, let's open the floor.
Stuart?
Carolyn, Joe, I have a question. Well, first a comment. One thing that I really like about the GMR PTC and your website is that you have updates that show new information for 2022, and it makes it really helpful and really easy to see what things have changed and what new expectations might be. But one question I have is, could you describe the process that the commission goes through when they're reviewing master plans? Because it's a unique system where we import information into your portal, and then there's a way to create an actual document, a PDF, which is a pretty handy tool. But I'm not sure if the commissioners actually print that out and use that, or is there a way that they go into the portal and they're looking at everything independently and they can compare and contrast against others? That's just been sort of a question I've had before.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. All of our evaluators, which include our evaluation team, as well as our commissioners and staff, all have a separate portal that we look at master plans through. So we do not download your PDF or anything like that. We look at it real time on the website, just the same as you entered it, basically, only a little bit different because we have our own notes pages and things like that. So we will, the process works when you submit a master plan and you've already been ranked as eligible to be designated. We will go through it as staff, make sure that all the pieces are there on at least some basic level, make sure it is complete and ready for evaluation. We then submit it to our evaluation team, which goes through and they do, now there's 2 tracks actually. They score it based on the scoring criteria in our system plan, and they also evaluate it for completeness. So they take a look at each of the main sections, just as we covered them here, and grade them as to if they meet our content standards or not. And it's not to try and be hard on people, it's to try and help them understand how they can maybe make certain sections better before it becomes a problem for them down the road, or to give us the information that we need to be able to fully evaluate what's going on. So if something doesn't quite make the grade, we'll send it back and have you fix it before it comes in before we finalize our evaluation. So those things are going on by the evaluation team. Staff conducts a site visit, which a few of you have had the benefit of being involved with. We'll spend a couple of hours on site with you, take a look at your master plan, go through the facility, understand it as best as we can in that sort of time frame. And then we take all of that information and give it to the commission, who also, commissioners have a chance to read the document themselves on the online portal. So they'll go through that information, they'll look at our reports, they'll look at the evaluation team's reports, and they'll make a final decision as to whether to designate something as regionally significant or not. So that cover it for you, Stuart? Does that cover everything?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
You bet. Me.
Joe, can you talk a little bit about how the streetlight data that will be coming out at some point may be beneficial in master planning and maybe even applications?
Absolutely. What Ben is talking about is we're working with our partners at DNR and Met Council Parks to get geofenced cell phone user data, not the user data, but just the fact that a cell phone was in a park or going along a trail, just as sort of a high-tech version of a trail counter, if you will. It allows us to understand where people were coming from generally, to understand how long they're in that facility, and maybe if they're coming more than once potentially. But it's a great resource for getting good hard data that's consistent across the entire system as to what your use pattern is like. We can tell time of day, time of season. We start to get these graphs that show you've got a high peak of use around noon and maybe a little bump at 5 p.m. or whatever else your system looks like. Maybe you're getting high winter use that you didn't know about. Other things like that. All of those metrics are increasingly important for master plans or master plan revisions, I think even more so, to understand what trends are over time and what those investments we're making, what impact they're having in getting people into the parks. So right now we've got parks data is coming online. It goes all the way back to 2019. So we get a snapshot from before COVID into and beyond COVID. See what those trends look like for any regionally designated parks or parks that were already eligible for designation. So once we get you at least through the designation application process and you rank high, we'll be able to start coordinating the collection of that data for your particular facility and give you a picture of, what are your use patterns? How does it compare to other parks across the region? And give you an idea of maybe it's useful for thinking about what to do next in your facility. And definitely for us, what are those use patterns over time? If we made $1 million investment in a park or on a trail, boy, it's nice to see what those numbers look like afterwards and how many people are using that park or trail. And to be able to compare it consistently with other facilities or other systems even. So that's a big piece of it, especially once you get into the master planning part. We're not doing it for all designation applications yet. But once you're at least working on your master plan, that should be something that we can help you get and just learn a little bit more. It's information that's been hard to get for a lot of people otherwise. Does that help, Ben? Okay. Thanks.
Joe, when's that information going to be available? Like if we're working on a master plan now, is that something we can talk to you about this fall?
We were hoping actually that by now we'd at least have the parks data on our website for our designees or eligible designees. I'm not sure if Renee's got a date yet or when that'll be out. And then the trail stuff will be coming at some point later. They're working on the trail data now. But you'll see an announcement on our website when that data is available, so you'll be able to use it.
Okay.
So for everyone here, if I can throw a question back at everyone, what's the part of the planning process or the components of a plan we talked about that scare you the most, you think are going to be the most challenging?
Funding.
Funding? I hear you there. You're well funded, Ben. What are you talking about? No, I'm just kidding. We can all use more. What about anyone else?
I think the hard part is knowing what makes you special and why people would want to come and visit you. Because it's stuff that we're used to and we have a lens of seeing it from the inside and not seeing it from the outside. So I'm afraid that we're going to miss things that other people might see.
Great point. So, that's where your public engagement is going to be a big piece of it, and making sure you cast a wide enough net. If you've got online surveys, if you're out talking to visitors in whatever format you have, people who are already coming, just asking them, what do you want to see in this? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly? You got to get a thick skin sometimes because you may think it's the best thing in the world, or your council member who's been there for 40 years, remember when it was built and still thinks it's new. Those things can happen sometimes, but to get a fresh eye on all the new recreation opportunities that are out there, there's new stuff we're finding out every year. People are now into this or they're into that. Now we're talking e-bikes, and there's all kinds of stuff going on the water and all those things. How do you keep up with that stuff? It's a little bit of work, but I'm glad you recognize that. And that's the first trick. Sometimes public engagement is just about finding out what you don't know. It doesn't get you the answer, but you can see a gap in your knowledge, and you got to go back and do a little bit more digging somehow to find those pieces. I'm doing it right now in a system plan. I get it. So I understand.
Joe, I would
So
piggyback on- oh, sorry, go ahead, Mary.
We're going through a master plan process right now. In fact, we're taking applications for focus groups for the area that we are going to apply for one of these days for regional significance. And we do have some online opportunities. So would you recommend to have those online opportunities to be like a QR code for visitors when they come into the park to make sure we capture that? And how do we prove that we've captured visitors' input?
Capturing visitors' inputs, usually that's a question on the survey itself as to where are you from? Like community I'm just working in now, we ask what ward do you live in? Or do you live outside of the community but in the school district? Or are you from outside of the area? So that question tells us a lot about the breakdown. And then we compare that with the demographics for the area afterwards to see if we hit everything. We can do the same with age groups or gender or ethnicity breakdowns as well. So you can kind of analyze, as long as you ask some of those questions, and hopefully get good response to help you understand who's taking the survey. Takes a little more questions, but you got to account for that. What was the other part of your question there, Joe? Sorry.
Nope, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
You covered it with that answer.
Yep, QR codes are great, but don't be afraid of traditional media. We've found out or been observing in a lot of communities, newspaper and radio and newsletters still have a lot of weight, as much as we only want to use Facebook and Instagram. So you got to be a little bit careful that you're not just focusing on one channel, or even having that QR code up in the park, or social media campaigns, or for us, when I was working on this one system plan, asking some of our community partners to help spread the word, getting that poster that you saw for Bemidji out there into the hands of a whole bunch of different kind of community organizations. The chamber, Visit Bemidji, getting it out to social service agencies, to the schools, asking them to help spread that word made a huge difference as far as the types of response we were able to receive and reaching new people. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
I'm just going to piggyback off of something you said earlier, and what I feel is a challenge is trends, all the new up and coming trends, but not just that, is determining what's going to be a fad and what's a new trend. And, determining what you put your infrastructure or funding into, not knowing if it's going to be just a fad. So I think that can be a little difficult for us sometimes too.
I think you're right. One of the hard parts is identifying those things that are maybe going to be short-term or maybe interim types of uses until the next thing that group is involved in decides. Sometimes 10 years later, you realize this wasn't a fad that I thought it would be too. And that can be interesting as well. What I'm starting to toy around with is this idea of making sure within a system, you've got space for testing new ideas. So maybe you put in a small skate park here and see how it goes. And if it's full up regularly, then you expand your investment to a place that makes more sense. So testing in small ways, if you've got a system to be able to play around with, can be good. And also just realizing that sometimes some uses are going to change, and you're going to have to come back and reinvent or adjust things. This is big on all the mountain bike trails, especially because people keep coming back, but within 5 years, they're going to want to see changes in some of those trails. So you're going to have someone go through and cut a couple of new trails and just change a couple of features up. And that can be enough to make it a new experience for those users. So being willing to go back and change some things and have that as a part of your plan up front, that can be an important thing. So those two main areas, testing and plan flexibility, I think are going to be parts of our future.
Thank you, Joe. I want to be respectful of everybody's time as well. I know it's knocking on the door at 2 o'clock. So we can continue on for those that want to keep asking some questions. We can certainly stay on a little bit longer. But I think based off of today and some conversations Joe and I have had, I think our next forum, I would like to revolve around public engagement just as a component and piece of this. So then I invite any of you, if you have people that are particularly good at that, or some of our business members that do a lot of that. I don't want to put Joe on the spot to be our leader in all of the next portions of the series. It'd be fun to kind of spread it around a little bit. So if you have ideas or people to kind of help lead some of the upcoming forums, I would just shoot us an email, talk to any one of your board members, or get a hold of us on the Greater Minnesota webpage as well. So any other ideas that somebody pulled out of this specifically that you would like to make sure I put in our upcoming forum series? You can let me know.
I would maybe just say like design, like what's expected, like hand drawings, you have to hire somebody, like, I mean, like what's the expectation when it comes to being able to show, what you want to do, it was mentioned you don't necessarily need the final engineer plans, but what's the expectation and how can maybe we do that both in-house and then also obviously at the consulting level, they have the tools and that too. But what are the options around that, I guess?
Okay.
Great question. Yes.
Carlin, one other thing that I think would be really helpful, and I've heard this from some of the groups we're working with, is once a master plan's approved and you are ready to get funding, there are a number of other hoops that have to be jumped through, and there's costs associated with those. And I think it would be really helpful for everybody to understand what those are, the timing, how you do it, how much it costs, because it's kind of a shock when you get this whole plan done, you're ready to apply, and if you get funding, then all of a sudden there's all these things that have to be done on a pretty immediate time frame. So that'd be really helpful.
Archaeology and SHPO and environmental
Yep.
assessments. Yep.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yep.
That's great. Good thought.
Yep. Good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Joe, for joining us, being our leader of the day and giving us lots of things to think about and lots of information. So more to come. We'll just keep convening over the summer and have a fun little series here with this. It's a lot of good information for everyone to have. So appreciate everyone coming today. Hopefully we can see you again in the future.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.